Hello and welcome to another episode of the Book Binge. Today's video being yet another book haul, and more specifically a birthday book haul, because October featured my birthday and I received several gifts from friends, of course, always for which I'm grateful for. This is actually the third time that I'm doing a birthday book haul on the channel, which feels really kind of strange and surreal. I again appreciate all of the friends who rallied to gift me some stuff to show off here on the channel. So, without any further ado, I don't really have much to say otherwise. Let's just kind of jump into the haul. But first, before we get into the gifts, I will show off the one book, or the one physical book, that I purchased for myself. Just for, specific ordering reasons. I don't have a reason to have this at the very end, so I'm just going to show off that my pre-order for The Fury of the Gods came in, for which I'm excited. Nice quality paperback, just as John Gwyn's stuff always is. And that is just to open up the book haul. From here for the next several minutes is all just gifts from friends for my birthday. So once again, thank you to everybody. I will thank you all in turn, specifically for which gifts you gave me. Let's start off with another Fantasy Orbit published book gifted to me from Eco, The Fire Within Them by Matthew Ward. This is actually the second book in the Soulfire saga. This follows a trend of the last time that Eco purchased me a gift for my birthday a couple of years ago, when he got me the fourth book in the Lonesome Dove saga. Despite my not having any of the other books already, he specifically said in the note for this one, oh, and once again, I'm going to gift you something that isn't the first book in a series. So I appreciate that gift. Matthew Ward is one that I'm looking forward to reading at some point. Eco also gifted me the Thrawn trilogy, Star Wars, being Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command. One of the Star Wars Legends stories that I'm actually more excited to get into at some point. I haven't read a whole lot of Star Wars stuff. In fact, I've read very little of it, but I do intend to change that here, preferably sooner than later. But, of course, that isn't necessarily likely to happen per se with how stacked my TBR is and how slow I tend to read, but Thrawn is definitely up in the priority for sure. Next up is going to be shifting focus just a little bit to a memoir, a nonfiction called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running by Haruki Murakami. It's basically, as far as I know, just kind of what the title is, just him going on a memoir about running stuff as an author and how running in marathons and that kind of thing have been a big part of his life. I'm interested in reading this, just as I'm interested in reading much of Murakami's output. Next up is basically going to be a long line of classics over here. Huge amount of them, and basically all of them are Penguin classics. Again, thank you to everybody who gifted them. Patrick also gifted me a copy of both parts of Orlando Furioso, like the crazy person that he is. Nobody like Patrick, and I really appreciate that. This is another epic poem, very lengthy one, obviously, but epic poetry is something that I'm interested in trying out, and Orlando Furioso is one that several friends got to and read earlier in 2024, and it definitely seemed like a fun time. In fact, when Patrick told me a little bit about it, he said, if you enjoy having fun, read Orlando Furioso, but that sounds like the kind of generic recommendation that he gives to a lot of stuff. So who knows how that could go, but it did have a great track record with everybody who read it as far as I know, so I'm definitely interested in giving that a shot, even if I have a couple epic poems to get to first, not least of which being a gift from Sorry, being John Milton's Paradise Lost, which I, for some reason, somehow have not read yet. Definitely pretty high on the pile of shame as far as classics, and especially as far as poetry is concerned, one that I'm very interested in checking out. So thank you to Sorry for gifting me this, and to Minna for gifting me the same thing. I actually got a duplicate of it, even though on my Amazon wish list it should have been impossible for that to happen, but somehow it happened. But thank you to Minna for the thought of gifting that. I had to return one of the copies of it, and I'm going to use the little bit of refund that I got from that for something else I haven't decided yet, but I'll definitely notate that next month as a gift from Minna, essentially. And that's how that's going to go. Otherwise, I am thankful to Minna for also gifting me Jane Eyre, and this being a copy that I could keep because it was not a duplicate. Definitely another classic that I'm very interested in checking out. Bronte sisters definitely have a really high reputation, especially, Charlotte and Emily. I read Wuthering Heights a couple years ago, which I really loved while I was reading it, but have gotten much less enthused by over time. But Jane Eyre is one of my mother's favorite books ever, and she really wants me to check it out. So this seems like as good a time as ever now that I have a copy of it. That should go on the TBR at some point pretty soon. And another book that is kind of up on the pile of shame for my classics TBR, will say, for reasons that I can't necessarily quite determine, is George Eliot's Middlemarch. Thank you to Rumo for this gift. Really appreciate that one. A relatively thick book, a little bit thicker than I was expecting it to be, but one that definitely seems like a good time, so long as you're not necessarily looking for a bunch of action and quick pacing. I've heard that this one is a little bit slow and plodding, but worth it, and that is good enough for me. I generally don't go into classics expecting for them to be page turners. The next few items are all by the same author, but definitely not gifted from the same people. We'll be talking a little bit about Charles Dickens, first off with a gift from Nicole, A Tale of Two Cities, a book that I did own a different copy of, but that version of it I wasn't really a fan of. I don't really like the page quality of it. I wasn't really super excited about actually reading the book from that copy that I already owned, and is actually a little bit of the reason why I've been pushing it off for a couple years, even though it's been one of the top books in my pile of shame for a good long while, now that I have a Penguin Classics version of it, because I really like the Penguin Classics copies for as simple and, easy to beat up as they are. Now it is going to be very top priority. In fact, I'm almost certain that I'm going to read A Tale of Two Cities next year. I'm pretty sure I already have it on my TBR, and if not, then I need to fix that because it's one of the ones that I want to read the most. So thank you to Nicole for that gift. Next up comes Great Expectations by the same author, gift from Tokyo, and poor Tokyo had run of her money for gift giving for me this year. Both the gifts that she tried to give me had problems with them. First off was Great Expectations, one that got lost in transit and just never showed up, so we had to coordinate to get that sent again to me. The second time it did show up, so thank you to Tokyo for this gift. Great Expectations is one of the Dickens I'm looking more forward to, even though probably half of his work I'm actually really excited to get to. That one is definitely one of them. And then also thank you to KJ for gifting me David Copperfield, much thicker book than a couple of these other Dickens, but most of his work is actually quite lengthy. A Tale of Two Cities and Great Expectation are actually amongst the outliers as far as that is concerned, but David Copperfield is one that gets a lot of great things said about it, has a great reputation, and one that I'm excited to read, just as I am excited to read, like I said, plenty of Dickens work. So thank you to KJ for that. The next item on this list, the next gift, is from Mason and is an absolute behemoth of a title. This is Samuel Richardson's Clarissa, or The History of a Young Lady, and to say it is massive is to sell it short. Let me just show you in comparison to the standard Penguin paperback size. It is like an entire half-inch wider and like an inch or maybe even an inch and a half taller than standard paperback sizes, and it is still like 1,300 or like 1,500 pages, even with the extended size. It is a massive book, but one that sounds interesting in its own way, especially given the epistolary format. Not sure when this one will go on the TBR, just on account of how huge it is, but I am definitely grateful to have that. Thank you to Mason for that gift. On a similar note, another massive chonker of a book is The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu, gifted to me by Alistair. Thank you very much, sir, for that. To say that this is massive is also to sell it short, because even compared to Clarissa, which I already said was gigantic, The Tale of Genji is also just a little bit wider, and it's just as tall, but it's just a little bit wider there. So like even this one's pretty big, and Tale of Genji is also something in the 1,100 page mark, so it's definitely no slouch as far as length is concerned either, but also one that I've had a resounding interest in for quite some time. Thank you to Alistair for gifting that to me. It's one that I've actually intended to buy for myself for probably like a year or so at this point, but just have never circled back around to because it's pretty pricey book, even within, the Penguin Classic sphere. It's pretty pricey, but no wonder it is ginormous. Next up is shifting to, rather than a classic author, a little bit more of a literary fiction author, even though it's not necessarily that old. This is Augustus by John Williams. I have copies of both Butcher's Crossing and Stoner by him, which are two of his three other novels aside from Augustus. I don't know what the fourth one is called, actually, but all three of these definitely sound pretty interesting. Augustus is no different. Very thankful to DJ Nana for gifting me this. Finally, we shift gears into something that isn't a novel, but rather a manga. Now, the first copy of this is The Girl from the Other Side by Nagabe, I think should be how that's pronounced, but I'm probably wrong on that, as I tend to be with a lot of foreign language stuff. This is a fairy tale inspired manga, and it definitely has a very charming art style and looks to be pretty fun, and I've had come very high on recommendation. I actually plan to read this pretty early in 2025. This one I did order for myself because for whatever reason on Amazon it just kind of isn't really in stock anywhere on Amazon, so I actually had to get that one through Barnes & Noble, and Reen gifted me the other 3 volumes of it, even though he said he wouldn't, because he is also a crazy person, but I'm very grateful. So all 3 of these omnibus collection, deluxe editions, and they are very nice quality, have a sort of a leather bound, or at least a faux leather bound sort of quality to them, with some of that, foiling in there. The gold in there is great. Like I said, the artwork is pretty charming. I love these covers. They're very cool. Thank you to Reen for gifting me the other 3 omnibuses of this manga. Again, I plan to be reading that in early 2025, so I'm excited for that. Thank you for giving me a little bit more reason to do so by gifting that to me. Thank you, Reen. Finally, the other thing that I'm going to talk about here isn't a physical gift, but is also another gift from Tokyo, because like I said, there was a lot of problems associated with the gifts. She gifted me another book as well. It's actually the same author as Wonderstruck back here. It's The Invention of Hugo Cabret, which is a great story. I love that. That was on my wish list. She tried to give me that, but it was an absolutely destroyed copy. It wasn't even that it got damaged in shipping. It was just that it looked like it had been like a used library copy, and that kids had just absolutely torn it apart, and therefore it got abandoned by the library or something like that, and ended up in an Amazon warehouse as a new copy to be shipped, and I just couldn't accept it, quite frankly. So instead, we got that taken care of. We were able to get that returned, and Tokyo instead gifted me an audiobook for her preferred favorite version of The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov, which is a story that I enjoyed, but I read the P&V translation of it, which is, of course, the version that nobody recommends of this story specifically, and plenty of people, including Tokyo, don't like their work just in general. But this translation of it, I don't actually know which translation it is, but this audiobook of it is the one that she really enjoyed, and was the one that she used to help me kind of understand a little bit more of the book. It is a story that I do want to reread at some point, and if I do, I'm going to do so with this translation and probably this audiobook, because it comes highly recommended from her. So thank you to Tokyo for that. I'm sorry that there were so many issues with your gift-giving attempts, we'll say. And since we're on the topic of audiobooks, we'll go ahead and talk about the one audiobook that I actually purchased this month, which, isn't as much as previous months, but it was definitely pretty lengthy, we'll say, and one that makes up for the fact that I didn't purchase very many items. This is actually the Dostoevsky Complete Collection. There's a complete collection on Audible that is 265 hours worth of content. It's everything that Dostoevsky did, different narrators. I think it's probably different translators in there as well, but for just a few bucks. It was on sale at one point, not too long ago, actually, but because it was on sale for basically just a few bucks to get something this massive and this much going on, and it was definitely worth it for the price alone. So that was something that I decided to pick up. But now that we have gone through all of the audiobooks and the physical books that I got over the course of October, let's go ahead and jump into the ebook section of this, which thank goodness is a lot shorter than last time around, because this is only covering 1 month instead of 3 months worth of time. but there are still a number of items to get through. So let's start off with the things that I obtained for Day of the Dragon, which of course is something that Ryan Cahill and a couple of other, I think specifically indie pub authors have started doing in 2023, I believe it was, where October 10th of every year is going to be Day of the Dragon, where certain authors band together and all of their dragon related bibliography is being sold for 99 cents for ebook, at least in the United States and the UK, because that's where they can control pricing and whatnot. Day of the Dragon, I picked up a few more Philip sequential stuff, so the A Time of Dragons duology, the Ranger Archives trilogy here, Leviathan up here as well, but there were a few other authors that happened to join in for Day of the Dragon stuff. Authors like J.A. Andrews, Andy Peliquin, and Quimby Olson. These other series I don't know anything about. The Miss Percy's guides will say is what this little trilogy here is. These Dragon Blood Assassin 4-book series here, and then of course the Keeper Origins and Keeper Chronicles trilogies. I don't know anything about all of these, but because they were bundled in there with Day of the Dragon 99 cents per book stuff, I picked them all up, and some of them look kind of cool by the covers. I'm interested in looking into at least what they're about here at some point pretty soon. Some of the other authors that I picked up multiple books from over the course of October include James Michener, which I picked up The Covenant, Centennial, Poland, and The World is My Home, which is a memoir, all by the author. Last month, I picked up a couple of books, Texas and Chesapeake, I believe, were the two of them. Multiple of these books are also pretty lengthy, kind of the way that those two were. Plenty of this author's output sounds pretty cool to me, so I picked these up to just because they were on sale, basically. I also picked up a couple of Ronald Malfi books. They Lurk here, which is apparently 5 novellas, and then Ghost Written, which I guess is apparently 4 novellas. I didn't realize that both of these were novella collections, but that is very cool. Given the sort of horror status that this author has, I'm actually pretty interested in checking those out. Maybe even more than, say, Come With Me or some of his novels, because novellas and shorter fiction and horror can definitely make for some very effective material, and Ronald Malfi is kind of been brought up to my attention recently, and it sounds pretty cool. Guy Gavriel, I also picked up a couple more of his books on sale, those being A Brightness Long Ago and River of Stars. Both of these, I believe, are book 2s in like duologies or something like that. Knowing specifically which books are connected to which ones in his bibliography is a little bit confusing if you're not paying too much attention, which I, of course, have not been paying very much attention, but these two I picked up because I'm picking up most of the author's work as it goes on sale, because he definitely sounds like somebody who I would enjoy and that I should probably get to sooner than later. Kind of the same thing with Ursula K. Le Guin. I picked up The Lathe of Heaven, which of course is a pretty well-regarded work of hers that I'm interested in checking out, and then I grabbed The Wind's 12 Quarters out of curiosity. Next up, we have a few science fiction related items in here, those being the ones that I picked up. The Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis. This was actually, I think, probably the first ebook that I purchased in October, so when this was on sale, I picked that up. I also got Galaxies by Stephen Baxter, which came recommended from a couple of people and sounded pretty good. And then Altered Carbon, which is something that Words in Time, I believe, has read and has spoken pretty highly of, despite it having some pretty graphic content as far as I'm concerned. It sounds cool. I don't really know much about it. I didn't pick up any of the other books in this trilogy, I believe it is. It's one that I'll read the first book, and if I want to continue, I'll continue. But for now, that is what I have. And then, of course, The Hellbound Heart, which is a pretty well known because of Hellraiser, and is a little bit more horror than it is sci-fi, but it kind of fits in sci-fi, I think, because I didn't have any other horror items to put into a specific category here. This is how I decided to group it up for sake of ease. Hellbound Heart is one of, if not the only Clive Barker book that I'm actively interested in checking out. For whatever reason, most of his work just doesn't really scratch any itch of interest for me, but Hellbound Heart does, so I picked that one up. Next up are going to be a couple of classics and what I would consider to be period pieces, books that were either written quite a while ago or are set in times quite a while ago, regardless of when they were written, or are in some other manner related to classics. One of the items in here is going to confuse a couple of other people, but we'll go ahead and talk about it anyway. First off, I want to talk about Beowulf, specifically J.R.R. Tolkien's translation, which I'm excited to check out. Again, another one of those kind of ancient I don't know if this one is specifically an epic poem or what the format of Beowulf is, but it is one that I'm definitely interested in checking out for similar reasons. Siddhartha is a well-known classic by Hermann Hesse, which is one that it's probably the only Hesse book that I'm interested in reading, and mostly because it's short and has a good reputation, so I picked that one up. I included Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver in here, even though it is definitely not a classic, but because it's actually based on or inspired by David Copperfield by Dickens, so I decided to include this in here because it fit pretty well in that category. This one is also very well known and very popular, and one that I want to check out, so I picked that up. And then there's some more period piece stuff, type stuff going on in here. So In the Heart of the Sea, which is the tragedy of the whale ship Essex, so kind of a historical fiction, maybe even just a historical book. I don't know for sure about something that happened in the 1820s or something like that. The Abominable by Dan Simmons, which I believe is about the first trekking of the Everest campaign, so some stuff that happened like 100 years ago. At first it reminded me of The Terror, but Dan Simmons has done a lot of stuff, and just because the cover's white and takes place in a cold wintry area doesn't necessarily make them similar, but I picked that one up. There's The Night Portrait by Laura Morelli, which takes place in World War II, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's called a novel of World War II and Da Vinci's Italy, so that's pretty cool. I picked that one up because it was pretty cheap. I don't think that was a free pickup. It was just a cheap one that sounded interesting. And then Wizard of the Crow, which seems to be sort of a period piece, something going on in Africa by an African author whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce because I would butcher it and it would just probably sound super offensive, just inadvertently. I'm not going to try to, but Wizard of the Crow is one of those things that might be sort of a way to introduce me into more African literature, because I have a very huge blind spot when it comes to literature written from that region or people from that region. This sounded pretty cool and was pretty lengthy and pretty cheap, so I was like, sure, that would be a cool place to go, and seems to be pretty well regarded, so that helps. A few nonfiction pickups as well. I got another copy or another volume in The Story of Civilization by Will Durant, The Age of Louis the 14th. This is volume 8 of it, so I picked that up. Dynasty, The Rise and Fall of the House of Caesar by Tom Holland. No, not that Tom Holland, the other Tom Holland. Sounds pretty cool for the concept that it's covering. I definitely was interested in picking that one up. I also got The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ by Roger Stone, which seems to be a little bit in the more conspiratorial side of the Kennedy assassination, which is stuff that I'm actually surprisingly not very familiar with, but you hear a ton about always whenever Kennedy's assassination is brought up. You have the people who believe in the narrative of what happened, and then people who think that it was definitely something different and more of the conspiratorial side of things. And whichever is true, I have no horse in this race, so I'm not going to say one way or the other, but I picked this one up because it was cheap, sounded good and interesting, and I'd be interested in checking out a little bit of content in that sort of sphere of history because it sounds cool. And then I also picked up Ray Bradbury's Zen and the Art of Writing. I've made it a point to pick up some writing related books, especially by popular authors. This was just another one that went on sale, so I grabbed that for that reason. Next up are a couple of duplicates, Pandora's Star by Peter F. Hamilton and Lady Joker Volume 1, so books that I have on Audible, even though I have them through the Audible Plus catalog, so at any point in time they could disappear. These are ones that I picked up on sale for Kindle when I saw them, specifically so that I can have copies besides those audio versions. Next up is going to be a number of assorted books that I picked up in the free range, so stuff that a friend posts on Discord, just a bunch of the free stuff that you can get on Kindle on any given day, and there's a baker's dozen of these to get through, so let's talk about some of them. So there's a wide variety of stuff in here, but plenty of them are either nonfiction or historically based as well. So these would be books like Uneven Ground, Appalachia, since 1945, The War of 1812 by Henry Freeman. You have the autobiography of Ben Franklin, which is pretty well known and one that I've been interested in checking out for a while, so picking that up was pretty nice. There's Pillars of Smoke and Fire down here, which is another one of those Israeli historical books that I've picked up. I've picked up a number of these that sound pretty good and interesting. There's Women in the Near, or in the Ancient Near East. Sorry, this one topically sounds pretty good and actually seems to be a pretty fair representation of that sort of topic. It seems like it would be an interesting read, so I picked that one up. There's The Girl from Santiago, which I think is a little bit more of a historical novel rather than a nonfiction, but I picked that one up because it was free and had an interesting concept, even if I don't really remember the concept. There's also Faith of North Hincapie, the saga of a young woman's quest for justice and love in colonial America. I believe this is historical fiction. It's a saga following like a family or something like that, but you know, that sounded cool, so I picked that up. There's also The Homeless Man's Journal, based on a true story by Shane Whitaker here. That one had a fun concept that I was definitely really interested in trying out. There's Unfelt down here, The Language of Affect in the British Enlightenment, which is a topic that I know nothing about, but sounds pretty cool, so I grabbed that. And then there's another nonfiction book in here somewhere called How to Market a Book by Ricardo Fayette. I've also picked up several nonfiction books through the free mechanism here about writing and publishing related stuff because it would be pretty useful to me. So that one is there as well. And then just a few other items that are a little bit more miscellaneous. You have another classic in The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, very well-known book, one that I picked up because I don't have a copy of it already for some reason. So there's that one. Servant of the Crown, yet another sort of fantasy book one that was going up for free at one point with an interesting concept that I was like, okay, at some point I might be interested in reading that because it's a little bit shorter for a fantasy book, and because it was free, if I like it, I might continue on to the rest of the series, but we'll see about that if I ever give it a chance later. And then there's a trilogy, I suppose, of books here in a collection by Lindsay Buroker called Dragon Blood, unrelated to Dragon Blood Assassin, which I talked about earlier from Day of the Dragon stuff. This wasn't on Day of the Dragon, it was a free thing that another friend happened to post on the same day in which I saw, and just happened to be dragon related on that day. I was like, sure, why not just pick it up? Sounded cool enough, even if maybe I'm not specifically its target audience, but there is that as well. And that makes up the rest of the book haul for October. Hopefully this video is a good bit shorter than the last one of these, and I hope to keep them that way in the future. I should probably stop picking up as many Kindle books for the foreseeable future to make these pretty limited for the time being. But thank you guys for watching this if you did, and one final thank you, one final time, to all of the friends who gifted me books for my birthday. I really appreciate you. It means the world to me. I don't know what the next video that's going to be on the channel is off the top of my head, so I apologize for that. Maybe I should go ahead and double check on that just for, you know, the sake of telling you what it is. Oh yeah, next Tuesday is going to be my review of Book 6 in the Wheel of Time back there, Lord of Chaos. That is going to be coming out on Tuesday, so if you're interested in that, I hope you'll be willing to check that out. Either way, I'll be back in the next video. I merely hope to see you there.